Hello, hello everyone, and welcome to our webcast about how to make your personal story stand out from the crowd. My name is Mariah. I am the one of the directors of programs at National Novel Writing Month, aka Nanowrimo. And if you don't, I'll tell. I'm here with two amazing guests who I was just chatting with before, and I'm very excited for you all to get to hear them. I'm here with Tashie Bhuiyan and Cornelius Minor, and I'll tell you a little more about them in a second. Um, while I'm talking, I'm going to give a little spiel about NaNoWriMo in case you don't know about it. And while I'm spieling, if you're here watching live, feel free to drop your name, or your name's already there. Feel free to say hello in the chat, maybe drop in where you're watching us from. I'm in sunny Oakland, California right now. I love hearing where people are joining us from. So NaNoWriMo is a, I should have this memorized. I mean, I have it memorized, but I also take my notes just in case I don't forget. We're an organization that provides the tools and resources and community to write novels and reach creative goals. We have this big flagship event in November, but we also have events throughout the year, and you can also use our websites year round. We have two of them actually. We have the nanowrimo.org site for people over 13 and older, and we have the Young Writers Program site, which is for young writers, so like any age, and teachers can use that site. So there's a lot of cool stuff there as well, and that's where I got started. I used to be a teacher, and that site is very close to my heart. Okay, so I'm going to explain a little bit about our guests. I'm here with Tashie Bhuiyan, who is a Bangladeshi American writer based in New York City, and her debut YA contemporary novel Counting Down with You releases on May 4th, 2021. So congratulations. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Um, I'm also here with Cornelius Minor, who's a Brooklyn-based educator. He works with teachers, school leaders, and leaders of community-based organizations to support equitable literacy reform in cities and sometimes villages across the globe. His latest book is called We Got This, and it explores how the work of creating more equitable school spaces is embedded in our everyday choices, specifically in the choice to really listen to kids. And I know, Cornelius, you are also involved with We Need Diverse Books, which is the
Yes.
organization that we're co-presenting this webcast with. So I was hoping I could pass it off to you to tell us a little bit more about We Need Diverse Books and this scholarship.
Well, it is so fantastic to be here with you, Mariah, and with Tashie, and with all of you out there in YouTube land. Again, my name is Cornelius, and I work with We Need Diverse Books, and it's an amazing organization. It is a 501c3 nonprofit and grassroots organization of children's books lovers that really just advocate for essential changes in the publishing industry. We aim to produce and promote literature that reflects and honors the lives of all young people. So really what that means is our mission is just putting more books featuring diverse characters into the hands of all children, that we really imagine a world in which all children can see themselves in the pages of a book. And so it's exciting to be here with aspiring writers. Yeah.
Thank you. And I know that We Need Diverse Books is producing, I think, with Penguin Random House, the sorry, I have all these notes. The Penguin Random House Creative Writing Awards, which are
Yes.
open to seniors in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. Um, I think you can apply in like a bunch of different genres, right? Like fiction or personal narrative or poetry or like spoken word, I think as well.
Absolutely. And so applications are open right now. So for all like you young people out there who really want to get a start at writing, this award is definitely the way to go. And so applications will be open until early March. And really, again, the mission of the program is to really, in partnership with Penguin Random House and We Need Diverse Books, we're really looking to distribute scholarship awards that encourage the next generation of diverse and unique voices. So.
Amazing. So we do novels at NaNoWriMo, National Novel
Mhm.
Writing Month, but we also um, we dabble in other kinds of writing as well. And we thought that for this workshop, it would be really cool to focus on personal narrative because we figured it was something that would be useful to all kinds of writers. So if you're applying to college, you're going to have to craft a personal essay about yourself. If you are applying for a residency, you're a writer and you're applying for a residency, you craft a personal essay about yourself. Or even sometimes when you're, trying to find an agent or a publisher, like people often want you to tell us your story in a compelling way. And that can be really hard to do because as writers, sometimes we're very used to writing. For me, at least, I'm very used to making up facts about other people. And I'm less used to thinking about how do I tell my own personal story in a way that doesn't just sound like, oh, I love writing, I love reading, I always have, which a lot of writers have that kind of same personal story. So we're hoping that this will be useful to all kinds of people, especially people who are applying for these personal narratives. Pandemic moment, my dog is scratching at the door, so I'm gonna let him in. Sorry. Otherwise he'll bark. He
Mariah,
won't
that's so
breathe.
real right now. So you're official right now. Like that's so
I feel like
awesome.
we're at the point now where it's just like, ugh, whatever,
Yeah.
Exactly.
um I'm literally sitting on I'm sitting on the floor so I can sit in front of my bookcases, not it's
I
real.
love it.
It's really happening. Okay. So I'm gonna for this first part, I'm gonna ask some questions from you all. You want me to let him jump up on the bed that he wants or the couch that he wants to jump on? Sorry. Go ahead. Maybe he'll make an appearance. Okay.
Awesome. What you're seeing,
Um,
folks, here is real writer life right here. Like you've got
what
3
kind?
writers on YouTube struggling to keep their pets under control. So
Exactly.
like this
We
is
do a lot of live events at Nanowrimo, and one time I was hosting a virtual write-in, and my cat threw up on the bed, in the middle of it, and I was like, but we kept going. Anyway, so we're gonna do the first part, focusing on some questions that I'd love to ask you about how to write personal narratives or personal essays, how to craft your personal story. Um, and then in the second part, we'll do a little bit of brainstorming together. You all will have a chance to write. And then in the last part, if you have any audience questions about personal narratives or about anything, like what's my dog's name, etc., we can answer them there. um, and just to tell you guys, I'm monitoring the chat and I see people who are coming in from all over, which is great. Like we've got um, Central California, Florida, Northern Jersey, the UK. Someone in the UK.
nice.
Hello.
Exactly.
Um,
God, it's almost their bedtime over there.
I know. Someone says, "Show us your dog," so I can do it. I know. Whenever anybody talks about their dogs or their kids, I'm like, I want to see.
Dog is the star of this live now.
There it is.
There it is. There it is. I feel like we're all about to be characters in Tashie's next book. That's-
Why not?
Why not? Let's go wild. Okay. So now I'm going to move into the hard-hitting interview questions. Just kidding. It would be great if it can be like a conversation, and I know that you all have a lot of opinions and advice for us. So, personal narratives. What makes a great personal narrative to you? And if you have any experience judging personal narratives, what makes a personal narrative or personal statement stand out from the rest of them?
Cornelius, you want to take it? And I'll go after you.
Yeah, and I feel like Tashi's so masterful at this, and so like I just think about it like as an educator and as somebody who works with young people all over the world. I always want to encourage people that like the best personal narrative helps your reader to understand why there's no one else on the planet like you. Right. And so this idea that like you can tell a story about things that other people have done, but the things that you glean from that story, right? The person that you've become because of that story, that's what's important. And so I always want to encourage people that, yeah, you might tell a story that feels universal, but your interpretation of that story really matters. And so I think the best personal narratives don't just recount events, but they also have an aspect of reflection that talk about how we have changed as a result of the event. And it establishes us as unique individuals.
My God, that's such a good way to put it, because I think about this in terms of like fiction a lot, in terms of like how like a lot of tropes have been written already, right? And they haven't necessarily been written by diverse voices yet. And so even though they've already kind of happened and existed and you've read it a million times, it doesn't mean that we've actually read every version of it. Because if someone like me or you writes a new the same trope in a different way, it's going to be different because only we could write it that way, because it's going to be shaped by our cultural expectations, like all kinds of things like that make us who we are, that then add such a deeper layer to the narrative that you may not have seen before, even if you've seen the age-old tropes and the age-old story before. So I think what you said is absolutely so true. I also feel like just being honest and like putting in like the small details that you think may not matter really makes a personal narrative feel so real and so close. Like if it's like a detail like, oh, like I wear wristbands because of blah 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 blah, like that's such a small detail that like doesn't really mean anything, but at the same time makes you who you are and makes it so much more like personal, and it's like a touchstone almost. But yeah, so I think like putting in those small details really helps make a great personal narrative.
And that like vibes so much with the stuff that I've learned, the stuff that we talk about writing fiction, right? Like when you make a character, you really do, it's like what are the small details about the character? And thinking about like when you're, creating a, an arc of a story, you think how does this change this character? I think
Yes.
looking for those arcs like in your
Yes.
life.
That was one of the first things that I didn't know about writing until like my third manuscript. And then I was like, oh, the character has to learn something. They have to grow.
I love it. I feel like, Tashie, I want you to just come to every class I teach and just say that.
Oh
Like,
my
I'm
God,
just
I
going to
would be
record that.
delighted to do that. I feel like a child, but still.
I'm like, please listen to her. So, yeah, absolutely.
I think what you said about making it unique as well is really interesting. I remember I applied for like a program a while ago, and you had to write a personal statement. And I went to like a Q&A, much like this one actually, where people could ask questions. And they said something like, okay, look, everyone applying for this is a writer. So everyone is going to say things like, I've always loved reading, or I always like to write, So they were like, find a special moment that happened to you that relates to that. So like thinking about, sure, reading's important, writing's important too, probably. Find that moment in your life when something changed or shifted or because of that love, or
I
make it really.
remember I wrote my college
Yeah.
essay about writing fan fiction.
Ooh.
I think it really is like individual to the person, because I'm sure most people
Yeah.
probably did not write their college essay about writing fan fiction, but it felt like true to like what I had experienced in high school, and it was like one of the things that made me love writing and reading. So
Yeah.
it felt like I should talk about that part of my life. So, and it got me into college. So.
Hey, it works. It works. Yeah, so that thing, I actually just applied for a research grant, and somebody was asking me about my history with research, and it was the same thing where I'm like, okay, everybody applying to this thing is a researcher. So everybody's going to be talking about how they love research libraries and how they love archives. And so I told a story about, my first kiss, and how like I knew it was going to happen because there was this kind of like awkward social situation. So leading up to it, I spent the week ahead of time researching, and I was in middle school pre-internet.
Sounds like
So
a
there
fun
was
book idea.
yeah, so there was
Very
no
wholesome.
internet to research. And so I had to I started with encyclopedias, and we know that encyclopedias don't work for kissing. And so then I started asking around, and people were like, check periodicals, but then all the periodicals were dirty. And so I became a researcher learning how to kiss, and so I tell that story. So when I'm applying for this
That is
research
such a
grant,
fun story.
yeah. And so always searching for the thing that makes you different than any other writer out there, or different than any other researcher out there, I think is really
Because
important.
no one has lived your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. Also, it makes me think like hearing that story is so charming. And I remember something George Saunders, who's an author I really like, say where he's like, your job as a writer is to be charming. Like we think
Yeah.
about if you tell a story to a group of friends, like you know how to make it good, like you know how to make them laugh or how to make them, like excited about it, and like we can bring that same energy to the page, which I think is cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we can come back to this question if you think of more things, but I want us to ask the flip side as well, which is just like what makes kind of a dud of a personal narrative, or if you have experience judging or like giving feedback on these, what are some common things that you see that cause a personal statement or memoir, or personal narrative to get kind of tossed aside or ignored?
I feel like when it feels like a little mechanical, like you're following like a how-to guide and you're like thinking more about how you sound to us rather than what you actually feel and what's true to what happened to you, like you're almost like glorifying it in a way where you're like, oh, like please like look at me and choose me, rather than being like, okay, like this is honestly how I feel, and this is honestly what happened to me, and this is honestly like what I want to convey to you. Like I think it's like wanting to connect on like a personal level with the person who's reading your work, right? Like knowing that that's a real human being and it's not just like a computer who's going through it looking for checkpoints, things to check off. Like things like that, like, I think are what makes it a little more of a dud situation, where like you can kind of feel like I've read this 17 times because they're just trying to put together a recipe rather than putting their own kind of twist and flavor to it.
Absolutely. 100% everything Tashie just said. I'm in her fan club. So yes, yes, yes to Tashie. And the only thing that I would add to that is I think the thing that makes it like, or the thing that makes personal narratives duds for me is like when I read a sense of entitlement. That kids who or people who expect that they'll get the position because of who they are. So they're like, well, my dad did this and my mom did this, so therefore I'm going to name drop all of those things into this essay so that, you know, like, and so that sense of entitlement is something that really like hits me, that there's a huge part of personal narrative that's a journey, you know, and Tashie talked about that earlier, where I really want to know, like, who is the human behind this pen and what have you learned, or who is the human behind this pen and who are you becoming, you know, and I think that sense of journey is really important for me. And so when I read a personal narrative and I sense that this person is not interested in growing, or this person is coming to the page with this huge sense of entitlement, that's a real turnoff for me.
That's so interesting because, like, I feel like if you
Yeah.
start like that, you could have honestly made it a good narrative by being like, oh, like, I have this parent and this parent, but like, this is how it affected me. And so now I'm different from them because I've had to like be shaped by their experiences. And like, people don't think about it like that. Like, they'd rather just kind of do what feels easy and just name drop rather than kind of going back and reflecting on themselves. So I think that's such a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think maybe this relates to it a little bit too, is like, I think sometimes people feel like your personal narrative needs to be very neat and wrapped up with a bow, you know? And like it can't be messy in any
It can be
way.
a work in progress.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a much more interesting story when you allow like, you know, when you allow like a little bit of mess and mistake and like your thoughts about it, your reflection to like come into, you know, come
Because
into
none of us
play.
are ever really finished growing. Like, we're always growing and learning more and becoming the best version of ourselves.
Absolutely. You know, and I think about just like the grittiness of life right now. And so personal narratives that are really reflective of who we are, as a people right now, I think is really important. I'm working with a young person and she's writing a college entrance essay, and you know, it's that season right now, and she wants to go into healthcare, and that's really very
That's so
important to
important
her.
right now.
Yeah, and I asked her, I was just like, well, you know, yeah, everybody has a story of wanting to be a doctor when they grew up. Everybody has the story of like buying the doctor kit and playing with their stuffed animals. You know, like we've all lived Doc McStuffins, right? But what makes you different? And one of the things that she said, she's like, you know, Minor, like the thing that like is really bothering me right now is that I have a friend who's an anti-vaxxer and it pisses me off. And I was like, that's what the essay needs to be about, that your personal narrative is about how livid you are because this person you love is an anti-vaxxer.
Anger is such
And
a raw emotion that's so good for personal narratives.
exactly. And I was like, that's what we need. And she was like, but I don't know how to solve this. Like, you know, I'm still kind of like really raw about it. And I was just like, that's it. Like your life is incomplete. Your growth trajectory as a human is incomplete. And that this personal narrative can tell a complete story, even though your journey is incomplete. And so that's really powerful for me.
That
Yeah,
was so,
especially
oh,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Yeah, especially because when you're applying to these kind of programs and colleges and etc., like they want to see you grow. Like they want you to contribute to whatever program you're a part of, whatever college you're a part of, and to see you like do amazing things. So like if you feel like you're already like the top shit, right? You're kind of like not ready for to like be a better and like more knowledgeable and like etc. human being. So I feel like when you're looking at stuff like that, like you want to see someone who is willing to change and be better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't know if we're allowed to I apologize.
You
They
can see
got
my
three
the shock
writers.
on my face. Like,
I just love Tashie, and I'm going to do everything I can to hype her up. And like,
No, it's okay. It's okay. In the future, we'll censor ourselves. It's all good.
so I'm over here like, go off, Tashie. Yes.
no, it actually fits with what I was going to say, which is like when you were talking about that doctor narrative and you said like, yes, we all have dreams of doctors. Oh, the doctor kit. Like I like sensing my own emotion level. It was just like blah blah. And then when you said that thing about the anti-vaxxer, like I felt the feeling of it,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
the rawness of it, where you're just like,
Yeah.
oh shoot, like that's there's a lot there, you know, that feels very passionate. So I think finding those moments of rawness or passion in your life that like still stand out to you because you're still mad or you're still like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
interested in something or still, you know, any of those things.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks for that. That was super interesting. So speaking of writing personal narratives, I'm sure we've all written them, and I'm wondering what are your first steps? What are the first steps that you take in writing them? And what kind of process do you follow? Any tips for just like, you know, people could leave this webcast and then get started?
Cornelius, you want to go first?
I know this is such a silly thing, but technology has done this to me. Whenever I'm writing a personal narrative, I actually take out my phone and I flip through the photos on my phone. That the things that I felt excited to document by taking out my phone and taking a photo are the things that I probably need to document with my pen as well. And so whenever I'm looking for ideas, I just like flip through the photos on my phone. And then the way I look at the photos, I don't look at the subject of the photos, but I look at the background and I try to like feel the feelings again. So I'm like, oh, I took this photo of my mom because I missed her. And so then I need to write about missing. And so it might not even be about my mom, but I kind of like think about, okay, is there a story where I miss someone floating around in my consciousness? Is there a story where I miss something floating around in my consciousness? And so the personal narrative that I'm personally working on right now is I'm a New Yorker, and in New York City there are no public bathrooms anywhere. And so
Yeah.
pre-COVID, you'd have to walk around the city looking for public bathrooms, and so Starbucks became my bathroom, right? And so I miss, because we can't be out anymore, I miss like trying to hustle Starbucks workers for the bathroom code. And so that's the personal narrative that I'm writing right now. But it came from a picture of my mom, because I saw my mom and I'm like, okay, I miss her. What are other things that I miss? And I'm like, oh, I miss that old gritty New York, trying to like sweet talk the Starbucks employees so that I could get the bathroom code. And so that's what I'm working on right now. But again, it all comes from just like flipping through photos on my phone.
You know what's so funny? The fact that when you said that, I thought of like my own like personal narrative just based on what you had just said. Because the Starbucks thing reminded me of, I like at one point in my life, I slept on the street for Saturday Night Live tickets. Right. And like it's like for multiple days. Like it was like a whole week I was on the street with my friends, right? And at nighttime, and like you like want to use the bathroom, but it's not like there's nowhere to go. But so there was a Starbucks across the street that we would go and we would literally just get ice water, right? Because it's free. And we'd be like, can we get some water? And they'd be like, oh my God, you're back again. And then we'd use the bathroom after that, or like charge our phones because there are outlets in Starbucks and stuff. So like that reminded me of sleeping on the street in New York City at Rockefeller Center, just like you know, and that's like a personal narrative in and of itself. And it was literally just you talking about Starbucks that made me think of that. So I think it's like those small moments where it's like you just kind of have to think about the mundane things that can somehow become more, because there's a story in every single thing. Like I can't do the photos thing because I have like a bajillion photos on my phone because I'm Gen Z, so like every second of the day I'm documenting something. So there's just, I literally had to clear my phone the other day of 40,000 photos, so I'm not even exaggerating.
Wow, Tashie.
Yeah, it's very chaotic over here. But I'd like to think of like key like memories in my life where it's like it might not even be a memory worth telling, like the same way you said, like the picture itself isn't what necessarily matters, but like how I felt and like how I talked about it to other people and how that experience might have changed me as a person. Like for example, like the Saturday Night Live thing definitely made me more bolder and more adventurous in attempting things, so I could write about being adventurous, etc. But like before that, like I don't know if I would have been brave enough to sleep on the street for a week. So it's like stuff like that where you just think about things that have happened to you that don't necessarily have to be unique. It could just be like mundane things, but they changed you in some way. So I think that's like what I try to think of, like what has changed me and how is that experience almost relatable to other people, I think is another thing. Like how do I not ostracize people when I talk about that? Like how can I make it into something that everyone can kind of understand and laugh at, even if they haven't necessarily experienced it?
Absolutely. And Tashie, like, I just love what you're doing here. Just like another great source for personal narratives is just vibing with people. So just
Yes.
like as I listen to you tell this Saturday Night Live story, I was like, oh snap, I have slept outside before. Like, and so I slept outside and I'm ashamed to admit this in front of a YouTube audience, but like I slept outside for Hannah Montana tickets. This
No,
is
I
Miley
was there for
Cyrus.
Harry Styles tickets, so I'm with you. I'm
Yes.
with
Harry
you.
Styles,
Yeah.
don't get me started.
Yeah. And
One day I'll meet him.
Yo, like, and maybe
I have to have my
Harry
Harry
Styles, if you're
Styles
watching
cut
right
out
now,
next to
yeah,
my bookshelves over there.
there it is. Like, so I hope Harry Styles on YouTube right now. I'm about to tweet him up so that he can like holla at my
He
people.
follows me on Twitter, so I mean,
All right,
Okay.
like,
If we had an hour more, this is all we would be talking about. Like we would take a deep detour, no matter what, and do this. But
next
wow.
time.
next time.
Yes.
Sorry, what were you actually saying, Cornelius?
No, but just like this, just that we're vibing, like, just like
Yeah.
the vibing, like that you get with a group of people that you admire or that you love, and you just like talk, like the stories that emerge are worthy of
It's so
documentation.
authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Um,
absolutely.
Two things that are less authentic that I'll offer just as I used to teach middle school and we used to write personal narratives and there are some kids who would say like I have nothing, like I don't have any stories about myself. And so we would go through a couple of techniques that sometimes worked if you feel like you're that person, is we would just have a list with like different headings like angry, sad, just like different emotions, and then list all the times they could think, 1 minute to list all the times you were furious, 1 minute to list all the times that you were, to try to dig up some passionate memories. The other thing that I've actually done is, have you ever made a life map? Which is like a
Yeah.
middle school technique. Yeah, where you
Oh,
just
absolutely.
map out your life and different little things, and it can be hard to, the trick is to go from like the big to the small, right? So you can say like graduation, it's like, okay, but like go smaller, right? Like what did the fight that you got in with your mom before the graduation because she wanted you to wear a different dress or something, like
Yeah.
you got to go a little deeper and smaller, and but those life maps can be a good digging in point.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I'm always encouraging people to like kind of dig slightly beneath the surface. So not just the story itself, but what was the response? Or what was the enduring feeling that was gnawing at your gut an hour later, right? And so it's the fight with your mom, but if we don't want to write about the fight with the mom, put me on the subway an hour later when I'm still thinking about that fight, like, and so just really helping people to see that you can pan the camera an hour ahead of time, or you can, pan the camera through a different point of view and see a different side of that personal narrative. So
This also reminds me how healing personal narratives can be, because there's like a lot of stuff that you don't want to unpack necessarily in your life that like you've gone through, which we should all probably go to therapy, but that's not the point. Anyways, but
or
like
that is the point.
writing,
Like, we should all go to therapy. COVID.
but writing a personal narrative can be healing in that like it's something that happened to you in the past that now you're writing and you're letting it out and you're finding like an ending point, even if it's not the end, and like being able to kind of put rest to it, I think can be so healing, because I find that in novels a lot as well.
One of our YouTube audience, Tarika Walton, said, this is about an earlier comment from you, actually, Tashie. She said, what Tashie just said is the reason why learning about writing teaches me more about mental health than about writing.
It's so true. Yeah. But all the books that I write always have a character, like the main character is always dealing with mental health stuff. So I feel that very acutely.
Same. Okay. I wanted to ask this question because NaNoWriMo, we like very much focus on like drafting and like getting your first words out and, like terrible first drafts, which is great. We also in January and February kind of try to provide people with some revision resources. And I think revising is so important. And I love revising personally, but it can also be hard and we don't always talk about it. So I was wondering if you had any tips for like revising a personal narrative.
I think it's so hard, right? Because it's like revising parts of yourself almost. So I think it's very hard to kind of take that step back and look at it as a writer rather than as the person who wrote it. Because I think those are two different things. Because the person who wrote it necessarily isn't going to be the person who's revising it. Because you have to be able to kind of get that distance to be able to look at it as a narrative rather than as your life. So I think you almost have to turn that part of your brain off for a few minutes and just kind of focus on like, how can I make this like the best version of it. So I feel like I've said that phrase 10 billion times now, but that's okay. But you know, like how can I push this to the next level? And like it would be pushing yourself. And when you go back into actually revise, you would become that person again who is telling the personal narrative. But that in between where you're figuring out what needs to be revised is when you just have to be fully just writer and focused only on craft. So I think taking a little step back, like maybe take a day off, like don't look at it for a day and just kind of keep it in the back of your head, but like, and when you come back, look at it with fresh eyes and kind of read it as if you were reading someone else's story and not your own story, and that will help a lot, I think.
Exactly. Like, I mean, again, I'm just going to be here all night saying yes to everything that Tashie says. Like, so, you know, I'm an old school New York hip hop head, right? You know, so I am like 90s hip hop all the way. And so much of my revision stance comes from Pete Rock. Actually, you know, that I was once listening to Pete Rock, the incredible and legendary DJ Pete Rock. So if you don't know Pete Rock, definitely, you know, go listen to a bunch of Pete Rock, right? Exactly. But I heard Pete Rock talk about being a DJ. And he talked about like when you're a DJ, like you catch like 12 seconds of a song. And then you ask yourself the question, what would happen if I exploded this 12 seconds of a song and turned that 12 seconds into a song of its own, right? And so I really think about revision that way, that if I'm writing about an afternoon, can I take 12 seconds of that afternoon and turn that 12 seconds into a narrative of its own, right? So if I'm writing about the afternoon that I argued with my mother, can I take the time when like walking up the stairs to go encounter her? Can I take that and really expand on the dread that I felt while walking up the stairs to go to that encounter, right?
Like
Yeah.
How do you step and having a different moment for each one, stuff like that.
Exactly. And so sometimes I think of Pete Rock, where take 12 seconds of an existing song and then zoom in on that 12 seconds and make it a new piece of art, right? And so that's an idea for revision. But then I think that sometimes DJs, what hip hop DJs do is they'll take 12 seconds of a song and then put it in a new context. So I might take 12 seconds out of a song and then put it into the context of a new song. And so again, that 12 seconds of me walking up the stairs, but I've walked up these stairs hundreds of times before. So can I put that treacherous walk up to go argue with my mother, and can I take another look at another walk up the stairs? And so I really approach this like a hip hop artist in so many ways. That's
a cool way to look at it. I love that.
Yeah. So for me, revision ain't nothing but remixing, and we know that remixes make everything better. So
love that.
Yeah.
I think that's a scene that made me feel like that could be a good idea when you're trying to generate ideas for a personal narrative too, like two moments in time that feel disconnected that are actually connected in some way.
Absolutely.
You know, like putting two, I think that's could be an interesting framework as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, because that's what hip hop is. You take two records that seem disconnected and then you put them together, you know, and so that.
And then you find out they worked better than you could have imagined.
Exactly. And so I've always approached writing like I approach music, in that way.
I love that.
Yeah. Perhaps my last question, depending on time, is so sometimes we get like other people to help us revise, right? You share your work with another reader and get their feedback. I was wondering if you had any tips for that, especially like if there's any good questions to ask, you know, because sometimes it's like I'll have a piece of work and I give it to someone and I'm just like, here, and they're like, maybe they're not a writer, you know, but they have good intentions and they're like, what do I do with it, you know? And so if there's any directions or questions or guidance that you recommend if you're working with, you know, seeking feedback from another person.
You know, yeah, I think about that a lot actually, because I'm always seeking feedback from other people. And here's how I'm always trying to find the right person for the thing that I'm working on. And so sometimes, you know, I'll go to a teacher or a writer or an editor. But recently, I've really been thinking about people whose perspective I admire. And a perfect example, I'm working on a piece right now, and there's a friend, a colleague really, we don't know each other that well, but every time we have to on Zoom give our perspectives on an issue, I just adore her perspective. I'm like, oh my gosh, like the way that you saw that problem was unlike anyone else in this meeting, or the way that you saw that situation, or the way that you like described that challenge. And so I just like what her eyes see when she looks at something. And so I was like, oh, I want her to look at my work in that way. And so even though she's not a writer, I was like, I like how your eyes see things. Every time we're in meetings together, your perspective is so compelling. And so I would love it if you looked at my piece in that way. And so I always want to tell people what I admire about them and what I want them to bring to my work. And so being able to say to a person, I really admire the exquisite care that you take of your grandmother. Can you look at my character in the same way that you look at your grandma? You know, I really like how you always find the funny moment with your friends. Can you look at this scene that I've written and pull the funny moments out of that scene? And so I always want to name for people what I admire about them and then what I want them to bring to my work when I ask them to take a look at it.
That is such a lovely perspective. I adore that. I think the way that I kind of go at it is I usually have like a list of like, do not touch these things, right? Like where I'm like, if I'm showing you this narrative, right? Like I don't want you to comment on the way that the anxiety is represented, or I don't want you to comment on the way that the Bangladeshi representation is represented. Like stuff like that, where it's like, there are some things that I don't necessarily need perspective on because I'm the best person who can write that according to my experiences. But I think like setting those kind of boundaries and being like, just don't worry about this. Like I have myself for that. And if I need someone else, I can go to someone who has those same experiences as me and ask them to look at it. But I just want you to look at this as a story, as a narrative, as like, as if you're just reading it, but not critiquing the exact like life experience in it. More like, how can I make this like more emotional? Or how can I give this more depth? Or like, how can I kind of make this have the most impact possible, rather than, oh, I didn't like the way that this person said this, or this person said, like, I don't need like the minute sentence level like kind of critique, because like I feel like when you're writing something like a personal narrative, it's so close to your heart, right? And it's hard when people kind of come like, and you're not giving them enough like to go on, that they're like, okay, well, I should just critique all of this because that's what they want. But you need to kind of be able to draw those boundaries for yourself and be like, hey, like, I'm so glad you're looking at this work for me, and I'm so glad that you're going to help me make it better, but I don't need feedback on this specific part or this specific part. So I think that is something that is very helpful, and something that we could all just use in our lives in general, just setting certain boundaries that can help with the communication aspect of it all.
One question that I share a lot of stuff with my husband, and sometimes I'll share him an early draft, and I'm like, I don't want any feedback. I just want you to say, is it a story, yes or no, you know?
Mm.
And or sometimes a question that I really like asking people is, tell me what this story is about, you know? And then to hear it come back at you in their own words is always gives me insight into what, because sometimes we don't know what we've created or what the important pieces are until somebody kind of reads them back to us.
Yes.
Those are two things that have helped me. Um, I also really admire Cornelius, the generosity that that approach takes, and
Yeah, that is
I aspire to do it.
such a lovely way to approach it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, writing is community for me, and I am always seeking, especially now that we're all separated and we're all socially distanced, I'm always thinking about how I can even use my process as a writer to build community. And so being able to identify people in your life, or people even on the periphery of your life who we admire for different reasons, I think is especially important for right now.
100%.
Yeah.
And we can leave the question portion with that kind of feeling. I think that's a nice place to end it. And we were hoping to spend a couple minutes actually brainstorming some ideas for a personal narrative. And I have a suggested prompt. But if any of the, like, if you had any ideas that were sparked by this conversation, I feel like ignore my prompt and just start writing that. Like, if you were like, oh my gosh, slept on the street for Harry Styles tickets or whatever, like, and you can see the narrative in there, then start writing that maybe. But if you don't have if nothing sparked so far, then I think we can spend maybe 8 minutes writing to this prompt. Where did I put it? I know I'm looking where I put it, but I can also tell you that it's pasted in the description below the video that you're watching. So if you um, do better reading, just go ahead and read it. Okay, so there's 3 parts. The first part, take a second, brainstorm 5 to 10 life events or experiences that stand out for whatever reason in your memory. And I wrote the word raw as we were talking. So anything that has like passion or rawness or something that feels feels like you need to explore it, and try to do like 5 to 10. The second step is to choose one of those memories that feels particularly rich and then jot down 10 to 20 details about the moment. And so this is going from big to small, right? So you can jot down like the place where you were, the time it was, but also maybe the shoes you were wearing and how the room smelled and anything else that stands out. So you've got like your list of memories, you've got your one memory and some list of details. And if you kind of are still writing and you run out of details, then you can go to step 3, which is writing a little bit to explore the question: how did you feel in that moment that you're remembering, and what meaning does it have for you now? Does it have for you now, and what changed in you because of it? So that's a long prompt, and again, it's pasted in the description below this video, so you can find it there. And I think we can take maybe 8 minutes. My timer. Yeah, let's do 8 minutes, and then come back together. And if 8 minutes feels too long, I'll turn it to 5, but I'll give you a warning. Don't worry. Okay. Ready, set, right. And you have about 2 minutes left. All right. That is 8 minutes. Cool. That time always passes so quickly for me, actually. It's so funny. If you're watching and you were writing with us live, please drop in the chat maybe one of the memories that you thought of, one of the details that you remembered, or if you started writing writing sentences, feel free to drop in the sentence. Sorry, I always feel like kind of dreamy coming out of a writing thing where I'm like, how do I talk and at the same time I can't.
Exactly.
Or just share how it went for you. How did it go for you all?
And Tashie?
It went pretty well. I feel like I just kind of had like a little breakthrough. The way that I kind of went about it, I was thinking about how earlier we were talking about healing. And so I kind of focused on that as a theme and like what it kind of means to heal for me versus what it might mean to heal for other people and how that kind of differs and like what I need to do to heal from certain things in life, etc. And like how it's not going to look the same for every person. So I was kind of focusing on that. And then I kind of had a breakthrough for my next book idea. So we're having a good time.
Woohoo!
Amazing. Yeah, see, like I just need to hang out with Tashie every night. Like I think that's
Yes, just like wilding out every single night.
yeah, just get pens and notebooks and we just write it up. But for me, I get stuck on like words. And so Mariah, when you said the word raw and you said it in your Mariah way, I got stuck on that word. And again, I think in song lyrics and snippets of music, and there's a line in on Busta Rhymes' first CD, where he says, "I make sure everything remains raw." And so I just kind of kept playing that lyric in my mind. And so then I went to like a time when that I heard that lyric, and what was interesting is like that was the last time that I saw my grandmother dancing. I was like playing this party and I played that song, and my grandmother, who hated hip hop, would come to my parties and dance to the music I played because she loved me. And I remember playing that song and watching her dance. And so I started like I just went to that moment of like my grandmother dancing to this Busta Rhymes song that she hated. And she only did so because she loved me. So and so I kind of started in that moment for me. Yeah.
That sounds
That's beautiful.
sounds so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of our guests are sharing what they were writing about. Laura Exists wrote about riding the tube to get to her first day for college. Ballin' with Keisha said, my high school graduation when I first recited my own poem on stage. Um, what's another one? Stephanie Zello wrote about the last band they saw and they really miss live music. And actually, so did Catherine,
Ew.
our producer, who's like writing in the background. I guess she wrote about it too, because NaNoWriMo chimed in, me too. Um, and Nile Woman wrote about the experience that they had when her parents or their parents criticized them for making writing a priority and even discouraged them from participating in NaNoWriMo, which I can imagine is a powerful, raw, and sad moment. Um, and Tarika added a sentence that she wrote. She said, when I remember these moments, I see myself as a third party watching the event with a sense of distance, as though it isn't me at all, but a beautiful little child that could be my daughter, which is really
Oh,
pretty.
that hits.
Yeah. Yeah. And Annette Brown wrote about her bout with cancer and finding the lump and remembering becoming fearful when she researched how to tell her son in a way that he understood. He was maybe 6, maybe 7 when she got the diagnosis, which is so sorry, so sad, and I'm sorry to hear that. And I hope that writing about it was a powerful experience. Cool. I'm glad that worked. Sometimes I don't write. The prompt doesn't work for me, but this one I followed a rabbit hole and it was interesting too. Um, and we've got a couple minutes left. I wanted to open the floor up for questions from the audience. If you have any questions about writing personal narratives, submitting to, college essays or scholarships or anything that you think our guests would have some experience with, or just any questions at all. One thing that I'm realizing is that like I do a lot of writing by myself. Like we're all kind of isolated. I'm in my house. Sometimes I think I need quiet or peace to like write. But I also forget how inspiring it is to like you said, just like bounce ideas and listen to people. So I hope everyone found this like
I find like
inspiring.
sprinting to be like one of the most helpful forms of writing, especially during NaNoWriMo when you have to hit like a word count. So I find sprinting with like other people and like just sitting down and being like, let's both write for like 30 minutes and let's see how many words we get. Cause it's like a healthy competition, but also like motivation because you're like, I want to show my friend that I did it. So I feel like sprinting is something that we can still do over the internet in these rough times.
True. Um, feel free to drop in the chat. I thought I would ask a question too, which is just part of submitting to things is just like dealing with rejection, right? Like as a writer, you're going to be rejected a lot. And I was just wondering if either of you had any good advice or tips for dealing with that, fear of rejection and being rejected.
I think for dealing with rejection, I think the best thing you can do is write something new. Because I think sometimes we get stuck in like a feedback loop where it's like maybe you're getting a lot of rejections on one thing, right? And you're like, okay, now I have to fix this one thing and make it right so that people won't reject it. Whereas you could just move on for the moment and move on to a new project or something else that feels close to your heart and like take that rawness of that rejection and like put like all the emotions you feel into this new project that is completely new. It's like an unopened page. And I think like doing that will help you because now you have something else to like go submit. And like you just keep taking more chances on yourself rather than writing yourself into a hole with the first thing.
And really, that's it for me as well. Like that every rejection is, of course, an opportunity to start something new. Like Tashie said, that I'm always like, and again, hip hop, right? 90s hip hop. So like, you'd get these artists that would create 90 songs and 12 of them would go on the album, right? And so it's this idea that I want to create a bunch of things because there's joy in creation.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah.
I
And
think
so
the concept of storytelling is so powerful. Like being a
mhm,
writer just to write is one thing, but like just loving storytelling is like
mhm.
another thing because it's like it'll always come through on the page.
Yeah, yeah, and I just think about all of, collectively and individually our ancestors, right? That I am African, right? I specifically Liberian. And when I think about the history of Liberia, Liberia was founded by formerly enslaved people who left the United States and returned to the African continent. And so there are all these stories in my family of people who use storytelling as a way to cope with horrors of American life until they found the agency to change, right? And so I'm like, oh, people told stories not to submit, but they they told stories because stuff was real bad. And if you keep telling stories, you can stay alive, right? And so yeah, so that's kind of what I think about. So for me, it's not, I mean, the rejection is a thing, yeah, and I definitely get sad and I definitely eat all my ice cream. But then there's the like, but Cornelius, you spent hours telling stories, so you are more alive than anyone else is because you have been invested in story. Yeah. So
I think that's such a good way to look at it. Like, it's just a part of who you are. Like, how could you ever stop, you know?
yeah.
We've got a couple more questions coming in, and I think I probably can ask at least these two. We're a little bit running out of time, but Tarika says, how do you know when you've hit a poignant moment of insight while writing a personal narrative, especially when you aren't sure if what you're writing will touch others?
Mm. That's a hard question, I think. But I feel like when you kind of sit back and you reread it and you can also feel it, I think that's when you kind of know. Because sometimes you reread your work and it still doesn't feel quite there, like maybe like a little flat, or like it could be pushed to a different level. But when you sit and you reread it and you're just like, wow, like, okay, like this feels really honest and true, I think that's when you can kind of tell.
All right, I agree. Seems like we got thumbs up on that.
Yeah. Again, everything that Tashie says is gold. So just like, I don't know, like I'm just like, I'm a fan. Like next time you see me on
tonight, I feel very worthy.
for the next NaNoWriMo gathering, I'm just gonna wear like a Tashie t-shirt. It's just
Let's
gonna
all
be
do NaNoWriMo together. I'm hype. I love doing NaNoWriMo. My debut was written during NaNoWriMo.
Oh my gosh, that's exciting. We love hearing that. I think personally, I'm a little biased, but I think it's fun too. We have another question coming in, which is from Mrs. Michelle. She says, any advice for perfectionists who just overthink and avoid putting words down?
yeah. Sometimes you just gotta dance. Like that I think about. Yeah, like I mean, if there are, stories exist without words on page, but there is no permanence without the words on page. And I am imperfect. We're all imperfect. And I think part of the beauty of this journey is capturing the imperfection. So I'm actually not at all interested in capturing the perfection. That I am human. And so the perfections that exist in me will exist on the page. And so I think it's okay to lean into that.
I found a helpful thing can be to write in like white font, so you can't even see it until you've already written. Like you'll find a bunch of typos afterwards for sure, but like at least it's there and you have the groundwork.
Yeah, NaNoWriMo is all about trying to push past.
Yeah, like not going back and revising. That's what I love about Nano, getting the words on the page.
I think it's true too, in that like you're no matter what, your first draft will be bad. Like no matter how long you spend thinking about what word to write, like it's going to change. And so like
why not write it? Be exactly the same.
Yeah, why not write it quickly versus, agonizing over it and then changing it anyway. So I think that's a muscle that you work too. So like when I first started writing, it was a lot harder to say that to myself. And now that I've revised a bunch of stories, I know I'm like, oh, I know this is the part where I think is terrible. And I'll keep writing and then, I'll come back and I'll revise. Like it's fine. So having that muscle and that experience can be really useful, I think. So it's just like that's such a common I think a lot of people feel you. Oh, so we're 1 minute over time. Sorry.
It's totally fine.
Great time talking. And let me just think. I guess just to wrap up, thank you to the audience for coming and sharing your time with us and writing with us. And thank you to Tashie and Cornelius. This was a really, really fun conversation.
So insightful.
Yeah, like I'm leaving feeling pretty pumped too.
Absolutely. And again, Tashie, I'm so excited about your work. It was just great to share the space.
It was so nice getting to know you and learning more about your work as well.
Yeah.
And your personality is just such a good vibe, good energy.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just like, I'm just going to be here gushing about NaNoWriMo and about Tashie. So like, yeah, you can cut the feed. And
cut the feed. Okay, let me think if I had any last things. Oh, find the links below this description. If you can find links to, both of our guest websites, you can find links to We Need Diverse Books and NaNoWriMo and the Young Writers Program, and more information about the scholarship and other resources that we have. And we encourage you to keep writing and keep coming to these things. And it was really fun to host with you. And I'll just show you for one last time.
Yes. Love this content.
Yes.
So, bye.